Welcome, dear friends, to Cozy Mystery. I'm Sebastian Thorne, your host with a warm British accent and a cup of Earl Grey. Tonight we step into 1928, a locked vault of gleaming silver, a door bolted from within, and a single drop of water that should never have been there. Hercule Poirot is summoned to Blackwood Hall, where treasures vanish and reappear like ghosts. Then murder, impossible, silent, perfect. Chapter 1. Introduction and Setup. The autumn of 1928 had settled over London like a velvet cloak, heavy with the scent of coal smoke and wet leaves. In the pristine flat at 56B Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot stood before his mirror, adjusting the points of his mustache with the solemnity of a priest preparing the Eucharist. The wax was imported from Paris, the comb tortoise-shell, the reflection impeccable. A soft knock interrupted his ritual. Captain Arthur Hastings entered without waiting for invitation, as was his habit, cheeks ruddy from the October wind and eyes bright with the excitement of a schoolboy who has discovered a secret passage. "Poirot, you must see this." Hastings brandished a letter as though it were Excalibur. The envelope was thick cream stock, sealed with crimson wax impressed by a silver chalice. Poirot accepted it with delicate fingers, turning it once, twice, noting the weight, the texture, the faint scent of bergamot that clung to the paper like a guilty secret. He slit the seal with a silver letter opener shaped like a miniature sword. The message within was written in a bold, impatient hand. "My dear Monsieur Poirot, I am in mortal peril. My silver collection, Roman denarii, medieval reliquaries, a sapphire-studded chalice said to have held the blood of St. Thomas, is vanishing piece by piece, only to reappear in impossible places. Last night a coin dated 44 BC was found balanced on the lip of my bedroom teapot. The night before, a silver goblet appeared inside my locked desk drawer. I fear not only theft, but something darker. Come at once to Blackwood Hall in the Cotswolds. Bring your genius, bring your discretion. My life may depend upon it." Sir Edmund Blackwood Poirot's eyebrows ascended like twin caterpillars on a leisurely stroll. "The little gray cells, Hastings, they tingle. A collection that walks by itself. None. It is not the silver that moves, it is the mind behind the movement that fascinates." He folded the letter with precision and tucked it into his waistcoat pocket, directly over his heart. "We depart tomorrow. Pack your warmest pajamas. The English countryside in October is no place for the delicate constitution." The following morning found them aboard the 9:15 from Paddington, Poirot ensconced in a first-class compartment with a copy of Le Monde and a cup of chocolate so thick it required a spoon. Hastings gazed out at the russet landscape, exclaiming over every picturesque village as though he had never seen an English hedgerow before. Poirot merely sighed and adjusted his traveling rug. "You admire the scenery, mon ami. I admire the symmetry of the telegraph poles, each exactly the same distance apart. That is beauty." At Morton in Marsh, a gleaming Rolls-Royce Phantom II awaited them, its silver mascot, a leaping stag. The chauffeur, a taciturn man named Briggs with a face like a bloodhound, touched his cap and opened the door. The drive wound through narrow lanes where the trees met overhead in Gothic arches, their leaves drifting down like golden confetti. Poirot closed his eyes and inhaled the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. "One feels the centuries here, Hastings. The weight of old sins and older silver." Blackwood Hall emerged from the twilight like a ship from mist. Tudor brick flushed rose by the setting sun, diamond-paned windows glowing amber, chimneys exhaling lazy plumes into the violet sky. Ivy clung to the walls with the tenacity of a jealous lover. The gravel crunched beneath the Rolls' tires as they swept into the courtyard, where a fountain splashed softly around a statue of Mercury, his silver caduceus catching the last light. Sir Edmund Blackwood himself awaited them on the front steps, a mountain of a man in his 60th year, waistcoat straining over a belly that spoke of port and pheasant, face ruddy as Hereford beef. His handshake was a vice. "Poirot, thank God you've come, the silver, it's driving me mad." He led them through a great hall where suits of armor stood sentinel and tapestries depicted the Battle of Agincourt in threads faded to ghosts. Every surface gleamed, silver candelabra, silver salvers, silver snuff boxes arranged with military precision. "My life's work," Sir Edmund declared, gesturing proudly. "Every piece catalogued, insured, adored." They passed into the long gallery where portraits of Blackwood ancestors glared down with the haughty disapproval of those who had never needed to earn a shilling. At the far end, a single door of ancient oak bound with iron bands. Sir Edmund produced a key the size of a small dagger. "The Silver Sanctuary," he announced, voice dropping to a reverent whisper. "No windows, one door, one lock, one bolt on the inside." He turned the key. The lock clicked like a judge's gavel. The door swung inward on well-oiled hinges. The room beyond was a treasure vault disguised as a gentleman's study. Mahogany panels reflected the light of a single chandelier, electric, but styled as candles. Glass cases lined the walls, each containing wonders. A Roman coin with Caesar's profile sharp as the day it was struck. A medieval chalice encrusted with cabochon rubies. A reliquary said to contain a splinter of the true cross, its silver filigree worked so finely it seemed spun by spiders. In the center stood a desk of burr walnut, upon which rested the latest acquisition, a sapphire-studded goblet that caught the light and threw it back in shards of blue fire. "No one enters when I am within," Sir Edmund boasted, locking the door behind them with a flourish. "Not my wife, not my nephew, not the servants. I bolt it from the inside. The key," he patted his waistcoat pocket, "never leaves my person." Poirot's eyes swept the room with the precision of a surgeon. "And yet, Sir Edmund, your treasures migrate. Tell me of the first incident." Sir Edmund's face darkened. 3 weeks ago, I locked myself in at 11, as is my habit, to catalogue a new shipment. At midnight, I stepped out for a glass of water. When I returned, bolted the door again, I found a silver denarius on my blotter, dated 44 BC. It had been in the far case, behind glass, behind lock. I am the only one with the key. Hastings gave a low whistle. Poirot merely stroked his mustache. "And the goblet inside the locked drawer?" "Last Thursday. I keep private papers in the desk, locked always. Found the goblet nestled among my correspondence like a cuckoo in the nest." They emerged from the sanctuary as the dinner gong sounded, a sonorous boom that rolled through the house like distant thunder. In the entrance hall, the weekend guests were assembling, a tableau of suspicion and silk. Lady Beatrice Blackwood drifted forward first, a vision in silver lame that matched the decor. At 48, she retained the bone structure of a Renaissance Madonna and the expression of a woman who has calculated the cost of everything and found it wanting. "Monsieur Poirot," she purred, extending a gloved hand heavy with diamonds. "Edmund's little hobby has become an obsession. I've begged him to sell half the collection. Paris is calling, but he refuses. One grows so bored in the country." Victor Blackwood lounged against a suit of armor, 32. Handsome in the way of men who know it, his evening clothes tailored to within an inch of vanity. "Uncle's silver is his substitute for children," he drawled, "though I could use a substitute for his purse strings. Lost rather a lot at Ascot." His eyes flicked to the sanctuary door with something that might have been calculation. Miss Elena Voss hovered at his elbow, 25, golden hair pinned in soft curls, secretary's spectacles doing little to hide eyes the color of cornflowers. She clutched a leather-bound ledger as though it were a shield. "Sir Edmund has been difficult lately," she murmured. "The disappearances upset him terribly." Dr. Harold Grimes bustled in, 55, hearty as a country squire, waistcoat buttons straining in sympathy with his patients. "Gout's playing up," he announced to no one in particular. "Prescribe myself a brandy. Care to join me, Poirot?" His medical bag swung at his side, black leather scuffed from years of house calls. Mrs. Agatha Finch, housekeeper of 30 years, stood ramrod straight beside the gong, her keys jangling like a jailer's. 60 iron-gray hair scraped into a bun, mouth set in a line that suggested she had seen every sin and forgiven none. "Dinner is served," she intoned, though some might do well to remember that gluttony is a sin. Finally, Miss Lydia Gray swept in like a stage curtain, all violet silk and trailing scarves, her dark hair coiled with silver threads that caught the light. "The spirits are restless tonight," she announced, violet eyes sweeping the company. "I feel a darkness gathering," Sir Edmund snorted. "Poppycock, I've invited Miss Gray to hold a séance tomorrow. I intend to expose her tricks in the Morning Post." Dinner was a masterpiece of tension served on silver plates. The consommé trembled in its bowls as Victor pleaded for a loan. "Just 5,000, uncle, to settle the worst of it." Sir Edmund's refusal was a slap. Lady Beatrice discussed Paris fashions with the intensity of a general planning invasion. Elena's hand shook as she passed the salt. A single tear slid down her cheek when Sir Edmund forbade her engagement to Victor. A secretary? Over my dead body? Dr. Grimes drank 3 brandies in quick succession, his laughter growing louder, his eyes glassier. Mrs. Finch presided over the removal of corpses with the grim satisfaction of an executioner. Lydia Gray toyed with her food, occasionally murmuring to the empty air beside her. At 11 o'clock precisely, Sir Edmund pushed back his chair. "I retire to my sanctuary. The new reliquary demands cataloging." He patted his waistcoat pocket where the great key rested. "Do not disturb me, I shall bolt the door from within." The oak door to the silver sanctuary closed with a thud that echoed through the house like a coffin lid. The lock clicked. The bolt shot home with a sound like a guillotine. Chapter 2. The crime discovered. The morning of the 15th of October broke with a pale, reluctant sun that struggled through the mullioned windows of Blackwood Hall as though it, too, dreaded what it might illuminate. Breakfast had been laid in the smaller dining room, kedgeree steaming gently under silver domes, toast racked like soldiers, marmalade glowing amber in a cut-glass dish. Yet the table remained unoccupied save for the silent presence of Mrs. Finch, who stood beside the sideboard with the rigidity of a guardsman at a tomb. The great gong that usually summoned the household to its bacon and eggs had not sounded. Instead, the house seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Sir Edmund Blackwood to descend in his customary thunder. By 8:30, anxiety had begun to coil in the corridors like smoke. Lady Beatrice appeared first, wrapped in a peignoir of dove-gray silk, her diamonds replaced by the duller gleam of worry. She rang for coffee, then rang again when it did not appear. Victor followed, hair tousled, tie askew, the faint scent of last night's brandy clinging to him like a guilty conscience. He poured himself coffee with a hand that trembled only slightly, then set the cup down, untasted. Elena Voss drifted in next. Pale as the milk she refused, her secretary's notebook clutched to her chest as though it might shield her from whatever was coming. Dr. Grimes arrived, rubbing his temples, muttering about the gout and the port and the impossibility of sleep in a house where the very walls seemed to listen. Lydia Gray was absent. She had taken her breakfast in her room, Mrs. Finch reported, on account of the spirits being restless. At 9 o'clock precisely, Mrs. Finch mounted the stairs with the measured tread of a funeral procession. She knocked once upon the door of the master suite, Silence. Knocked again, louder, still nothing. Descending, she informed the assembled company that Sir Edmund had not rung for his shaving water, nor had his bedroom fire been lit. A murmur rippled through the breakfast room like wind through dry leaves. Victor laughed, a brittle sound. Probably slept in the sanctuary again. Uncle's been known to nod off over his catalogues. But his eyes slid toward the long gallery and the laughter died in his throat. They proceeded in a body, a reluctant pilgrimage led by Mrs. Finch and her jangling keys. The corridor smelled of beeswax and old stone. Their footsteps echoed too loudly as though the house itself were amplifying their unease. At the door of the silver sanctuary, Mrs. Finch rapped sharply with her knuckles. The oak absorbed the sound and gave nothing back. She tried the handle, locked, called Sir Edmund's name once, twice, her voice cracking on the second attempt. Silence. Victor shouldered forward. "Stand aside." He pounded with his fist, the blows reverberating like drum beats. "Uncle, open up." Nothing. Elena pressed a handkerchief to her lips. Dr. Grimes' face had gone the color of putty. Lady Beatrice merely watched, her eyes narrowed to slits of calculation. "There is no spare key," Mrs. Finch said flatly. "Sir Edmund kept the only one upon his person at all times." Hastings, who had been hovering at Poirot's elbow, suggested the obvious. "Then we must break it down." Poirot raised a hand. "Patience, mon ami. Observe first." He knelt before the door, examining the lock with a magnifying lens produced from his waistcoat pocket like a conjurer's dove. The keyhole was large, old-fashioned, the brass worn smooth by generations of blackwood fingers. A faint scratch marred the escutcheon, recent by the brightness of the metal. Poirot's nostrils flared. He sniffed delicately, then straightened. Beeswax and something else, oil perhaps. Interesting. Victor had already disappeared, returning moments later with a pair of footmen and a crowbar pilfered from the stables. The first blow splintered the silence. The second sent a shower of oak shards across the turkey runner. On the third, the lock gave with a groan of tortured metal and the door swung inward on hinges that screamed like the damned. The silver sanctuary was exactly as they had left it the night before, save for the man at the desk. Sir Edmund Blackwood sat upright in his high-backed chair, head slumped forward onto his chest as though in prayer. His right hand still rested upon the open catalogue. The left clutched the sapphire-studded goblet he had been admiring. A thin line of blood, dried now to the color of rust, traced from a puncture at the base of his neck down into the collar of his evening shirt. His eyes were open, staring sightlessly at the page before him, where the ink had blurred slightly. Whether from tears or blood, it was impossible to tell. The room itself was pristine. The glass cases stood undisturbed, their treasures gleaming with malevolent innocence. The reliquary remained upon its velvet cushion. The desk drawers were closed. The bolt on the inside of the door was still thrown. The key, Sir Edmund's own massive key, rested in the lock on the inside, exactly where he would have left it after shooting the bolt. Hastings gave a strangled exclamation. Elena turned away, pressing her face into Victor's shoulder. He held her automatically, his own face drained of color. Dr. Grimes stepped forward, professional instinct overriding shock, and pressed 2 fingers to the dead man's neck. "Cold," he pronounced. "Dead since midnight, perhaps earlier." He lifted the head gently. The puncture was small, triangular, no wider than a stiletto blade, but deep enough to have severed the carotid. "Murder," he said simply. Poirot moved about the room with the silent intensity of a cat in a dovecote. He examined the wound, the catalogue, the goblet. He opened each drawer, ran his fingers along the undersides of tables and chairs. He studied the carpet, a rich aubusson in shades of burgundy and gold, and paused near the desk. A faint damp patch darkened the weave, perhaps 6 inches across, already drying at the edges. He touched it with a gloved finger, then brought it to his nose. "Water," he murmured, "but curiously pure. No scent of the house supply, no lime, no minerals. Distilled, perhaps." Inspector Barrow arrived within the hour, summoned by telephone from the nearest town. He was a large man with a mustache like a hedge and the expression of one who has seen too many locked rooms and too few solutions. He surveyed the scene, scratched his head, and delivered his verdict with the finality of a judge. "Suicide's out, no weapon. Murder's impossible. Door locked from the inside, key in the lock, bolt thrown. No windows, no chimney wide enough for a cat. How the devil did the killer get in and out?" Poirot stood at the windowless wall, hands clasped behind his back. "That, Inspector, is the question. But observe. The key is in the lock on the inside, yet the door was locked from the outside when we arrived. The bolt, yes, is thrown from within, but the key—" He gestured delicately. "The key was turned after the bolt was shot. Someone locked this door from the corridor, then somehow placed the key inside with the dead man." Barrow stared as though Poirot had suggested the moon was made of green cheese. "But that's impossible." Poirot's smile was small and terrible. "Precisely, Inspector, and yet here we are." Outside, the wind had risen, rattling the diamond panes like impatient fingers. Inside the silver sanctuary, the silver gleamed colder than ever, and the dead man sat in his chair, guarding his secrets with the patience of the grave. Chapter 3. Investigation begins. The long gallery had been transformed into an interrogation chamber by the simple expedient of drawing the velvet curtains against the gray morning and lighting the chandelier to its full, unforgiving blaze. Poirot had arranged 6 chairs in a precise semicircle before the marble fireplace, where a reluctant fire crackled as though it too resented the early hour. Inspector Barrow stood to one side, notebook open, pencil poised like a spear. Hastings hovered near the door, half guardian, half gossip, his eyes bright with the thrill of the chase. The suspects entered one by one, each pausing on the threshold as though crossing into a confessional. Lady Beatrice came first, the silver lame of the previous evening replaced by morning black that made her diamonds appear almost vulgar. She seated herself with the grace of a duchess and immediately produced a cigarette in a jade holder longer than courtesy allowed. "I retired at 11, she began before Poirot could speak, exhaling smoke toward the frescoed ceiling. Edmund was alive then, cataloguing his wretched baubles. "I took a sleeping draught, laudanum 2 drops, and slept until Mrs. Finch's infernal knocking at 8:30. Her voice was steady, but Poirot noted the way her left hand worried at the missing stone in her diamond brooch, twisting the setting until the skin blanched. Victor Blackwood followed, attempting nonchalance and achieving only a lounging slouch that fooled no one. His evening clothes had been exchanged for tweeds that smelled faintly of the stables. A smear of mud decorated one cuff. "Played billiards alone until 1, he declared, lighting his own cigarette from Lady Beatrice's. "Butler saw me in the gun room at midnight cleaning Uncle's Purdy's, asked for a whiskey, refused, went to bed." Poirot's gaze flicked to the mud, then to Victor's shoes. Polished oxblood, no trace of the stable yard. The butler, when questioned later, would recall Victor passing the sanctuary corridor at 11:15 humming, "Yes, we have no bananas," under his breath. Elena Voss entered clutching her ledger like a hymnal, her cornflower eyes red-rimmed. She sat on the edge of her chair, knees pressed together, voice barely above a whisper. "I was reading in my room, Jane Eyre, the madwoman in the attic, until the grandfather clock struck 12. Sir Edmund had forbidden my engagement to Victor. He said secretaries were for dictation, not matrimony." A tear escaped, but Poirot noticed the ledger's ribbon marker had advanced only 3 pages since yesterday. Beneath her chair, when she departed, a silver thimble glinted, engraved with the Blackwood crest, the sort used for mending altar cloths in the estate chapel. Dr. Harold Grimes bustled in with the forced heartiness of a man who has prescribed himself courage. His medical bag swung heavily. The brass clasp was unlatched. "Gout kept me awake," he boomed. "Prescribed myself laudanum at 11:30, then brandy at midnight. Checked on Sir Edmund at 10. He complained of stiffness in the neck, asked for a liniment." Poirot opened the bag under pretext of returning a dropped pencil. Inside, morphine ampoules, a hypodermic syringe in a velvet case, and a small bottle labeled aqua destillata, distilled water, half empty. The syringe's needle was unusually wide bore, the sort used for equine injections. Mrs. Agatha Finch marched in as though leading a parade, keys clashing like cymbals. She stood rather than sat, spine straight as a ramrod. "My boy never stole that spoon," she declared, the grievance of 15 years burning fresh. "Sir Edmund sacked him without wages, ruined his character. I was in the still room until 11, then my room above the kitchens. The maids will vouch." One of her keys, a new Yale, bright against the ancient iron, caught Poirot's eye. It was labeled Sanctuary Duplicate in her own meticulous hand, though she insisted it opened only the linen cupboard. Lydia Gray entered last, trailing patchouli and mystery. She arranged her violet shawls with theatrical care, then fixed Poirot with eyes the color of storm clouds. "The spirits warned me," she intoned. "At the séance tomorrow I intended to contact Sir Edmund's late mother. She disapproves of the sapphire goblet, says it carries a curse." A single silver thread, fine as spider silk, had caught in the fringe of her shawl, identical to the thread Poirot had noticed earlier on the sanctuary carpet. Poirot dismissed them with a wave, then turned his attention to the door itself. The lock was a Brahma, complex but not invincible, the keyhole large enough to admit a child's finger. He inserted his own key, cut that morning by the village blacksmith from Mrs. Finch's linen cupboard duplicate, and noted how it turned with a slight resistance, as though the wards were gummed. Scraping gently with a penknife, he extracted flakes of pale yellow wax, recent, still soft. Someone had taken an impression. The damp patch on the carpet had dried completely, leaving no stain, no residue. Poirot knelt, nose inches from the aubusson, and inhaled. Nothing. He fetched a glass tumbler from the sideboard, inverted it over the spot, and waited. Condensation formed inside the glass, pure, clear droplets, distilled water, evaporated without trace. He straightened, eyes gleaming. The weapon, mes amis, was not metal, not glass, not wood. It was water itself, frozen to a point, melted to nothing. Hastings gaped. An icicle. But how? Poirot tapped his temple. Patience. First we establish who could fashion such a weapon, who could enter and leave a bolted room, who could lock a door from the outside and place the key within. He produced the sanctuary key from his pocket. Inspector Barrow had relinquished it reluctantly and examined the bow under his lens. A hair-fine scratch marred the brass, crescent-shaped, as though something metallic had gripped it hard. Chapter 4. Clues and Red Herrings. The afternoon light, thin and pewter, filtered through the high windows of the long gallery and turned every silver object into a cold accusation. Poirot had dismissed the household to their separate corners, but the house refused to settle. Doors opened and closed like nervous lungs. Footsteps echoed. A woman's laugh cracked halfway into a sob. Inspector Barrow had taken the sanctuary key and stationed a constable outside the broken door. Yet the air itself seemed to carry the crime from room to room, impossible to confine. Poirot began with the safe embedded behind a portrait of Sir Edmund's grandfather, a florid gentleman whose eyes followed one like a debt collector. The combination had been Sir Edmund's birthday, 14 on 368, and yielded with insulting ease. Inside lay insurance policies, share certificates, and a folded IOU on heavy cream paper. I promised to pay Sir Edmund Blackwood the sum of £10,000 on demand. Victor A. Blackwood. The ink was fresh, the date 3 days old. Poirot slipped it into his pocketbook without comment. In the billiard room, the table still bore the ghost of last night's game. Chalk dust, a half-empty glass of whiskey, and a smear of blood on the ivory cue ball no larger than a sixpence. Hastings bent close. Victor's blood? Poirot dabbed it with a corner of handkerchief. It flaked, dark and granular. Port wine, mon ami. Your friend Victor spilled his drink and wiped it poorly. Yet the cue rack held an odd gap. Number 4 missing, the baize beneath lighter, as though a cue had rested there for years and been removed only recently. Upstairs, in Lydia Gray's bedroom, the air was thick with incense, and the sweeter rot of lilies left too long in water. The medium had fled to the village to consult the spirits, Mrs. Finch reported, but her dressing table told another story. A small spirit lamp still flickered beneath a silver thimble inverted over it. Inside, a residue of clear jelly had hardened into a perfect cone. Poirot lifted it with tweezers. Frozen water melted and refrozen. On the blotter lay her Ouija board, the planchette resting on the letters VICTOR. The silver thread from her shawl had been wound around the planchette's pointer like a noose. Dr. Grimes' room offered richer pickings. The medical bag left unlatched in his haste contained the expected morphine and laudanum, but also a vacuum flask lined with cork, still beaded with frost though the day was mild. Poirot unscrewed the lid. A faint mist curled out, carrying the clean scent of nothing. He tipped it, 3 drops of water, perfectly clear. In the waste paper basket, crumpled and half-burned, lay a sheet of notepaper. If you breathe a word of the Carstairs child, I will ruin you. E.B. The handwriting matched the letter that had summoned Poirot from London. Mrs. Finch's keys required subtler handling. Poirot found her in the still room, sleeves rolled, arms white to the elbow in flour. A word, madame. She wiped her hands on her apron and followed him to the pantry, where he produced the Yale key. This opens the sanctuary, yes? She bristled. It opens the linen press, as I told you. Poirot inserted it into the sanctuary's broken lock. It turned halfway, then jammed. Halfway is enough for mischief, he murmured. On the key's shank, a smear of yellow wax matched the flakes from the lock. Mrs. Finch's eyes flicked to the knife block. 2 blades missing, one returned with a nick in the steel. Victor's bedroom yielded the most theatrical discovery. Beneath the mattress, wrapped in a silk stocking, lay a silver candlestick from the dining table. Its base dented, a smear of something dark along one edge. Hastings sniffed. Blood? Poirot scraped it with a fingernail. It flaked into rust-colored dust. Stage blood, mon ami. Your cousin is rehearsing an alibi. In the grate, ashes of burnt paper, fragments of a train ticket to Southampton dated tomorrow. Elena Voss was discovered in the chapel, kneeling before the altar as though praying for absolution. Her ledger lay open on the pew. The last entry read reliquary, insured $25,000. Beneath it, in smaller script, V plus MUI, forever. Poirot closed the book gently. You forged Sir Edmund's hand, mademoiselle? She flushed crimson. Only the inventory. He dictated, I wrote. He trusted me. The thimble found earlier now rested in her palm, warm from her grip. It was his mother's, she whispered. I borrowed it to mend my stocking. By twilight, Poirot had assembled a constellation of clues that pointed everywhere and nowhere. The IOU, the missing cue, the frozen thimble, the vacuum flask, the half-turning key. The stage blood, the burnt ticket, the forged ledger. Each suspect wore guilt like a second skin, yet the locked room laughed at them all. In the library, Poirot spread the evidence across the baize table as though dealing patience. Hastings watched, bewildered. "It's too much, Poirot. They can't all be guilty." Poirot's smile was thin as a scalpel. "Precisely, mon ami. The murderer has scattered breadcrumbs in every direction, hoping we choke on the feast. But one clue." He held up the vacuum flask, frost still clinging to the cork. "This one does not lie. It keeps its secret cold." Chapter 5. Complications and Twists. The storm arrived at Blackwood Hall with the suddenness of a verdict. One moment the sky was the color of wet slate. The next it split open in violet-white lightning that turned the long gallery into a photographer's flash. Thunder followed like artillery, and every candle in the house guttered as though the very air had taken fright. Power failed with a sigh. The electric chandelier died, leaving only the fire and a scatter of oil lamps to push back the dark. Rain lashed the windows in sheets, drumming on the lead like impatient fingers. Poirot stood at the French doors of the drawing room, watching water stream down the glass in silver rivers. Behind him, the suspects had been herded together under pretext of safety in numbers, though no one felt safe. Lady Beatrice nursed a brandy she had not tasted. Victor paced, collar unbuttoned, eyes darting to every shadow. Elena sat rigid on a sofa, ledger forgotten in her lap. Dr. Grimes poured himself a fourth glass with the concentration of a man diffusing a bomb. Mrs. Finch stood by the door, keys clenched white-knuckled. Lydia Gray had vanished entirely. At 9:30, the lights flickered once, twice, then surrendered. Darkness swallowed the room. A woman screamed, "Elena," Poirot thought, and in the blackness something metallic clattered to the floor. Hastings struck a match. By its flare they saw the silver candlestick from Victor's room rolling in slow circles, its base now slick with fresh blood. Victor swore and lunged for it, but Poirot was faster. He lifted the candlestick to the matchlight. The blood was warm, arterial, and smelled faintly of iron and port. A single fingerprint marred the stem, Victor's own, pressed in haste. "Someone struck me from behind," Victor gasped, touching the back of his head. His fingers came away red. "I was fetching more candles from the sideboard." The match died. Another was struck. In its brief life, they saw Lydia Gray in the doorway, shawls soaked, eyes wide with theatrical terror. "The spirits!" she cried. "They tried to drag me into the sanctuary." She held up her wrist. A ring of bruises bloomed like violets. Yet Poirot noted the bruises were symmetrical, thumb and fingers, and the skin unbroken. No spirit, but a very human grip. Inspector Barrow blundered in with a constable and a hurricane lamp. "Found this in the corridor," he announced, holding up a sodden carpet bag. Inside, Lydia's violet shawls, a train ticket to London, and the missing billiard cue wrapped in oilskin. The cue's tip was splintered and dark with what might have been blood. Lydia collapsed into a chair, sobbing that the spirits had packed for her, that she was fleeing a curse. Upstairs in the sanctuary, the broken door hung askew. Someone had been inside. The sapphire goblet lay on its side, a hairline crack running through the stem. On the blotter, fresh ink. "You will all pay." The handwriting was Elena's, careful copperplate. Elena, when confronted, turned the color of candle wax. I wrote it weeks ago," she stammered. "Sir Edmund dictated a letter to his solicitor. I must have left the sheet behind." But the ink was wet, the nib of her fountain pen still glistening in her pocket. Dr. Grimes chose that moment to confess, partially. "I entered the sanctuary last night," he admitted, voice thick with brandy and shame. "Sir Edmund rang for me at 11:40. Said his neck pained him worse than ever. I gave him a draft, laudanum and a touch of morphine. He was alive when I left. I swear it. Yet the vacuum flask in his room was now empty, the cork stopper chewed as though by frantic teeth, and the hypodermic syringe had vanished from its case. Mrs. Finch produced her own complication. She led Poirot to the still room, where the knife block now held only one blade. The nicked one returned, wiped clean. "Someone took my boning knife at dusk," she said. "Found it in the rose bed, blade bent." The knife, when retrieved, bore a sliver of ice in the hollow of the handle, already melting. Poirot wrapped it in his handkerchief and said nothing. Victor attempted flight at midnight. Hastings caught him in the stable, saddlebags stuffed with silver spoons and the forged IOU. "I'm done waiting for inheritances," Victor snarled, struggling in Hastings' grip. "Uncle changed his will last week, left everything to a museum. Elena helped me burn the new draft in the library grate." The ashes confirmed it, charred fragments of vellum, the word museum legible in Sir Edmund's spidery hand. Lightning struck the old oak by the drive. The crash shook the house like a blow. In the sanctuary, the temperature plummeted. Frost feathered the inside of the glass cases, though the fire still burned in the grate. Poirot entered alone, lamp raised. On the carpet directly beneath the chandelier lay a perfect circle of melted ice. No footprint, no disturbance, only the faint scent of ammonia. He knelt, touched the puddle, tasted it with a cautious fingertip. Distilled water, laced with something sharper, ether perhaps. Back in the drawing room, the suspects had formed uneasy alliances. Lady Beatrice and Dr. Grimes shared the brandy bottle. Victor and Elena whispered in a corner. Mrs. Finch stood guard over the decanters as though they were the crown jewels. Lydia Gray had recovered sufficiently to attempt a trance, her head thrown back, eyes rolled white. "The killer is among us," she intoned. "I see a hand. A frozen hand." Her own hand, Poirot noted, was clenched around the missing hypodermic syringe, needle glinting like an icicle. Poirot clapped once, sharp as a gunshot. "Enough! The storm isolates us, yes, but it also preserves. Footprints in mud, frost on glass, blood that has not yet dried, these are gifts. Tomorrow, when the light returns, we shall see clearly." He did not add that the light might reveal more than they wished. Chapter 6. The Revelation. The storm had spent itself by dawn, leaving the Cotswolds washed clean and shivering under a sky the color of tarnished pewter. Blackwood Hall dripped from every eave. The gravel drive was a shallow river, the rose beds flattened into muddy graves. Inside, the drawing room had become a tribunal. Poirot had arranged the suspects in a perfect circle around the cold hearth, their faces lit by a single oil lamp that threw long shadows up the paneled walls like accusing fingers. Inspector Barrow stood behind Poirot's chair, notebook closed for once. He knew the denouement when he saw it. Hastings perched on the arm of a sofa, eyes bright with anticipation and a touch of fear. Poirot began without preamble, his voice soft yet carrying to every corner as though the room itself leaned in to listen. "Mesdames et messieurs, we have danced long enough. The impossible crime, locked door, bolted from within, key inside with the corpse, is always the simplest when the curtain is drawn. Sir Edmund was murdered between 11:40 and midnight. The wound, a single puncture, triangular, deep. The weapon vanished. The room, sealed. Yet the truth is elegant like all great crimes." He produced the vacuum flask from Dr. Grimes' room and set it on the table with a gentle clink. "Exhibit 1. Cork-lined, still cold to the touch, though the storm has passed. Inside, distilled water, frozen solid by Dr. Grimes' own method. He keeps such flasks for transporting Sarah. Frozen hard enough, water becomes a blade. The ancient Eskimo, they say, kills with ice. Why not an English murderer?" Dr. Grimes started up, face purpling. Preposterous. I treated his gout. Poirot raised a hand. Patience. Exhibit 2. He laid the hypodermic syringe, recovered from Lydia Gray's clenched fist, beside the flask. Wide bore, equine size, filled with distilled water from the flask, then frozen in the cork-lined interior. The needle itself becomes the mold. At 11:40, Sir Edmund rings for you, doctor. You enter. He admits you, trusting his physician. You offer a draught, laudanum to dull reflexes. While he sips, you produce the ice needle. One thrust, here. Poirot touched the base of his own neck. Instant death. The carotid severs, blood flows inward. You arrange the body at the desk, exit, close the door. Victor laughed, a cracked sound. But the bolt! The key inside! Poirot's smile was wintry. Exhibit 3. From his pocket he drew a pair of long surgical forceps, the sort used to extract bullets. These were in your waste-basket, doctor, wrapped in gauze. You insert them through the keyhole. The lock is old, the hole generous. Grip the bow of the key, already in the lock on the inside. Turn. The scratch on the key bow matches the forceps' jaws. You lock the door from the outside. Release the key. It remains in the lock. Withdraw the forceps. The bolt was thrown earlier. By Sir Edmund himself. You needed only the lock. He turned to the carpet sample he had cut from the sanctuary floor, now stiff with dried residue. Exhibit 4. The puddle. Distilled water, no lime, no minerals. The ice needle melts in minutes at room temperature. By morning, only dampness. No weapon, no trace. He produced the test tube from Grimes' bag, its interior still rimmed with frost. You molded the ice here, doctor. The vacuum flask kept it frozen until needed. Lady Beatrice leaned forward, diamonds flashing. Motive? Poirot's eyes softened, almost pitying. Exhibit 5. The Carstairs child. 5 years ago, a botched appendectomy. The boy died on your table, doctor. Sir Edmund discovered the truth, threatened to expose you unless you paid an annuity. The burnt note in your grate, his final demand. Last night he raised the sum. You could not pay. So you silenced him. Grimes slumped, the fight gone out of him like air from a punctured balloon. He laughed at me, he whispered. Said he'd ruin me in the Lancet. I saw the flask on the shelf. The ice formed so perfectly. Poirot continued, relentless. The red herrings, your accomplices unwitting. Victor's IOU, real but irrelevant. He burned the will, not the man. Lydia's Ouija. She spelled Victor's name to deflect suspicion. The silver thread was from her own shawl, planted by you, doctor, when you passed her in the corridor. Mrs. Finch's key. She had a duplicate for emergencies, but you borrowed it to take the wax impression. Elena's forged ledger. Innocent, she altered values to protect Victor's inheritance. The candlestick, the billiard cue, the bruises, all theater arranged by you in the dark to muddy the waters. He turned to Lydia. You packed your bag, yes, but not to flee. The doctor persuaded you the spirits demanded it, to create chaos. The train ticket was never used. Lydia's shawl slipped from her shoulders. He said it was a prank, to frighten Sir Edmund. Poirot faced Grimes fully. You entered at 11:40. Killed at 11:45, locked the door at 11:50. Returned to the drawing room by 12, flushed but composed. The storm masked your footsteps. The distilled water was your signature, clean, clinical, invisible. Silence fell, thick as the fog outside. Then Grimes laughed, a terrible sound. Clever little Belgian. But you'll never prove the ice. Poirot produced a final exhibit, a glass vial stoppered with wax. Inside, a perfect ice needle, refrozen from the sanctuary puddle using Grimes' own flask. I preserved it, doctor, in your medical refrigerator. It matches the wound exactly. Your fingerprints are on the flask, the forceps, the syringe. The game is up. Inspector Barrow stepped forward, handcuffs glinting. Grimes rose without resistance, a broken man in a rumpled waistcoat. As he passed Poirot, he muttered, "He should have left the past, buried." The circle broke. Lady Beatrice poured herself a brandy with steady hands. Victor embraced Elena, who wept silently into his shoulder. Mrs. Finch's keys fell from her fingers with a clatter. Lydia Gray stared at the Ouija board as though it had betrayed her. Poirot turned to the window where the first pale sunlight touched the wet lawn. "Order is restored," he said softly. "The little gray cells, they do not lie." Chapter 7. Justice served. The drawing room at Blackwood Hall had never felt so small. The circle of chairs was gone, the oil lamp extinguished, and the storm's aftermath lay in puddles on the window sills and a smell of wet stone that clung to every curtain. Dr. Harold Grimes sat alone on a straight-backed chair in the center of the rug, wrists cuffed, the brass catching the weak morning light like a joke in poor taste. Inspector Barrow stood behind him, helmet tucked beneath one arm, the other hand resting on the doctor's shoulder with the absent weight of a man who has done this before and will do it again. Poirot remained by the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back, watching the scene with the calm of a conductor who has just brought the orchestra to its final, perfect chord. Hastings lingered near the door, half in, half out, as though the room might still explode. Victor Blackwood and Elena Voss stood together by the French windows, fingers laced so tightly their knuckles were white. Lady Beatrice had retreated to the sofa, a fresh brandy trembling in her hand, diamonds hidden beneath black gloves. Mrs. Finch hovered at the threshold, keys silent for once, her face carved from the same oak as the sanctuary door. Lydia Gray sat apart, shawls discarded, the violet silk pooled around her like spilled wine. Barrow cleared his throat. "Harold Grimes, I am arresting you for the murder of Sir Edmund Blackwood. Anything you say." The formal words rolled out steady and inevitable. Grimes did not interrupt. His eyes, bloodshot and sunken, fixed on the carpet as though the pattern might offer absolution. Poirot spoke first, softly, to the room rather than the prisoner. "The law will take its course, but the house must breathe again. Let us settle the lesser accounts." He turned to Victor. "Monsieur, you burned a will. That is fraud, but not murder. Return the ashes to the solicitor. The estate will decide your fate." Victor's shoulders sagged. Elena pressed closer, a silent promise. To Elena, "Mademoiselle, your forgeries were acts of love, misguided but not malicious. The ledger will be corrected. Your position is safe." A tear slid down her cheek, but she nodded. Lady Beatrice set her glass down with a click. "And my husband's collection?" Her voice was steel beneath velvet. "It passes to the nation as the true will intended," Poirot replied. "The museum will honor his name. You, madam, will have Paris after all, on a widow's portion." Mrs. Finch stepped forward, keys, extended like an offering. "The sanctuary key, sir, the real one. Sir Edmund gave it me years ago for emergencies. I never used the duplicate for ill." Poirot accepted it gravely. The iron was warm from her grip. Lydia Gray rose, unsteady. "I was a fool," she said, the theatrical cadence gone. "He promised the seance would frighten Sir Edmund into selling a piece, enough to pay my debts. I believed him." Poirot inclined his head. "The spirits, mademoiselle, are often invoked by the desperate. Go home. Leave the board behind." Barrow signaled the constable. Grimes was helped to his feet. As they reached the door, he turned. "Poirot." The name cracked like a whip. "You'll never know how close you came to missing it. The ice. It was perfect." Poirot's smile was gentle. "Perfection, doctor, is the province of the little gray cells. Ice melts. Truth does not." The doctor was led away. His footsteps echoed down the corridor, past the suits of armor, past the silver sanctuary where the broken door now hung open like a wound. A police van waited on the gravel, engine ticking in the cold. The constable opened the rear door. Grimes climbed in without looking back. The van crunched away down the drive, swallowed by mist. Inside, the house exhaled. Fires were lit in every grate. The smell of bacon and coffee drifted from the kitchens. Victor and Elena disappeared toward the library, speaking in low, urgent tones: future, marriage, forgiveness. Lady Beatrice telephoned her solicitor, voice crisp with plans. Mrs. Finch restored order with the efficiency of a general, directing footmen to board the sanctuary door, to catalog the silver under museum seals. Poirot and Hastings stood in the long gallery as the sun finally broke through, gilding the portraits and the glass cases. Hastings cleared his throat. "Jolly good show, Poirot, though I still don't see how you knew it was the distilled water." Poirot tapped his temple. "The puddle, mon ami. House water carries lime. It leaves a tide mark. This was pure like the doctor's Syrah. And the vacuum flask. Only a physician keeps such things. The rest was theater." A museum curator arrived by noon, bowler hat in hand, catalog trembling with excitement. The sapphire goblet was wrapped in cotton wool, the reliquary photographed from every angle. Lady Beatrice watched from the staircase, a black veil over her face, but her eyes were dry. By tea time, the police had gone. The constable's boot prints dried on the turkey runner. Mrs. Finch served scones in the morning room, her hands steady for the first time in days. Victor proposed to Elena over clotted cream. She accepted with a laugh that rang like bells. Lydia Gray's luggage was collected by a taciturn driver. She left without a séance. Poirot and Hastings took the 3:15 from Morton in Marsh. The train steamed south through meadows silver with frost. Hastings gazed out at the passing villages. "Funny," he said. "All that silver and the real treasure was the truth." Poirot adjusted his traveling rug. "Truth, Hastings, is the only metal that never tarnishes, though a good moustache wax comes close." They reached London as dusk fell, the city lights flickering on like 1,000 small pardons. Whitehaven Mansions welcomed Poirot with the scent of lemon polish and silence. He hung his hat, arranged his correspondence, and poured 2 small glasses of tisane. Hastings raised his in a toast. "To justice," Poirot clinked glasses, "to order restored, and to the little gray cells which never take a holiday." Chapter 8. The mechanism revealed. The drawing room had been cleared of its tribunal chairs and brandy glasses, yet the air still carried the faint charge of revelation, like the hush after a thunderclap. Afternoon light, thin but honest, slanted through the tall windows and laid pale rectangles across the turkey carpet. Poirot had requested a table, plain oak, no cloth, and upon it he arranged his exhibits with the precision of a watchmaker. The vacuum flask, the hypodermic syringe, the long surgical forceps, the refrozen ice needle in its glass vial, the sanctuary key with its telltale scratch, and the small square of carpet cut from the death scene. Hastings stood to one side, notebook open, pencil poised. Inspector Barrow leaned against the mantel, arms folded, mustache bristling with professional curiosity. The household had been dismissed, justice served, accounts settled, but the mechanism of the crime demanded its own epilogue. Poirot began with the flask. He unscrewed the lid. A breath of cold escaped, though the storm was 2 days past. "Observe, messieurs, cork-lined, double-walled, the sort used for transporting vaccines. Dr. Grimes kept it in his surgery refrigerator. On the night of the murder, he filled it with distilled water from this bottle." He lifted the aqua destillata vial, half empty, label crisp. "Pure. No minerals, no taste." He then inserted the syringe, wide bore, equine, and drew the water into the barrel. The plunger was sealed with wax to prevent leakage. Into the refrigerator for 2 hours. The water froze solid, forming a needle of ice within the steel needle itself. Hastings leaned closer, but the steel would conduct heat. Precisely, Poirot interrupted, eyes bright. The steel warmed quickly once removed, but the ice core remained long enough. Grimes carried the syringe in the flask, cork insulation, to slow melting. At 11:40, Sir Edmund summoned him for neck pain. The doctor entered, trusted, no suspicion. He offered a draught, laudanum in a silver cup, already prepared. Sir Edmund drank. While the drug dulled reflexes, Grimes produced the syringe from his pocket. One thrust, here. Poirot touched the base of his own neck just above the collar. The ice needle pierced the carotid, death in seconds. Blood flowed inward, staining the collar, but not the carpet, Barrow grunted. And the steel needle? Withdrawn instantly, the ice core remained embedded, melting within minutes. By the time we arrived, only the puddle. Poirot lifted the carpet square. The faint ring of dampness had dried to a ghost. Distilled water leaves no residue. House water would have left lime scale. This was the first clue that sang to the little gray cells. He turned to the forceps. Now, the impossible exit. Sir Edmund had bolted the door from within, his habit. The key was in the lock on the inside. Grimes exited, closed the door, and faced the problem. Lock from outside, leave key inside. He inserted these forceps through the keyhole. The lock is Brahma, the hole generous. The jaws gripped the bow of the key. See the crescent scratch? A quarter turn. The lock clicked. He released the key. It remained in the lock. Withdrew the forceps. The bolt was already thrown. The door was sealed. Hastings whistled. But the bolt? Thrown by Sir Edmund himself before the murder. Grimes needed only the lock. The wax impression, taken days earlier with Mrs. Finch's duplicate key, allowed him a practice run. The yellow flakes in the lock were his rehearsal. Poirot lifted the ice needle vial. I reconstructed the weapon using the sanctuary puddle and Grimes' flask. The wound photograph matches exactly, triangular, 3 millimeters at the base. The syringe barrel still carries microscopic blood crystals, frozen at the moment of withdrawal. Barrow scratched his chin. And the red herrings? Distractions brilliantly scattered. The IOU, real but irrelevant. The Ouija board, Lydia's thread planted by Grimes. The candlestick blood, port wine and stage paint. The bent knife, ice sliver in the handle melted by morning. All to create a fog of suspicion. Even the storm was his ally, masking footsteps, isolating the house. He produced a final item, a small silver thimble, the one found beneath Elena's chair. Grimes borrowed this from the chapel sewing basket. He used it as a secondary mold, a backup weapon in case the syringe failed. The jelly residue inside was water, refrozen. He returned it to Elena's room to implicate her. Hastings closed his notebook. But why the vacuum flask in the wastebasket? Panic. After the murder, he hid it there, intending to retrieve it later. The storm delayed him. I found it before he could. Barrow pushed away from the mantel. Enough for the assizes. The ice needle alone will hang him. Poirot replaced each item in its evidence box, aligning the corners with geometric care. The beauty of the crime was its simplicity: ice, lethal, silent, self-destroying. The forceps, an everyday tool, overlooked. The distilled water, the doctor's signature. Yet perfection is fragile. One pure puddle, one scratched key, one frozen flask. These were enough. Outside, the sun strengthened, gilding the wet lawn. The museum van had departed with the silver. The house felt lighter, as though the weight of centuries had been lifted with the goblet. Mrs. Finch passed in the corridor, humming a hymn under her breath. Victor and Elena's laughter drifted from the library, plans for a spring wedding. Lady Beatrice's trunk stood in the hall, labeled for Paris. Poirot snapped the evidence box shut. The mechanism is revealed, the curtain falls, order is restored. He glanced at Hastings. And you, mon ami, you will write this one for the Strand? The public loves an ice murder. Hastings grinned. With your permission, old chap. Poirot adjusted his tie in the mirror. Permission granted, but omit the mustache wax. A detective must keep some secrets. The grandfather clock struck 4, its chimes clear and unafraid. The house, for the first time in days, sounded like a home. Chapter 9. The Full Explanation. The library at Blackwood Hall had been chosen for the final unraveling because it was the only room large enough to hold both the living and the echoes of the dead. Afternoon light, now golden and forgiving, poured through the tall south windows and turned the dust motes into slow-dancing fireflies. The long table had been cleared of its usual clutter of catalogues and ledgers. In their place stood Poirot's evidence box, open like a magician's case, and around it the surviving players arranged themselves without prompting. Lady Beatrice on a high-backed chair, black veil lifted to reveal eyes sharp with curiosity. Victor and Elena side by side on the window seat, hands still linked. Mrs. Finch at the door, keys finally at rest. Inspector Barrow leaning against a globe, arms folded. Hastings perched on the library steps, notebook balanced on his knee like a schoolboy at a lecture. Poirot stood at the head of the table, small and immaculate, the light catching the perfect curve of his mustache. He did not raise his voice. The room itself seemed to lean in. Mesdames et messieurs, the crime is solved, the murderer taken, yet the full picture must be painted stroke by stroke, for only then is justice truly seen. We begin not with the murder, but with the man. He lifted a photograph from the box. Sir Edmund Blackwood in his prime, standing before the sanctuary door, key raised like a scepter. A collector, yes, but also a tyrant. He hoarded silver and secrets with equal passion. 5 years ago, Dr. Harold Grimes operated on a child. Master Carstairs' appendicitis, misdiagnosed as colic. The boy died. Grimes falsified records. Sir Edmund, a governor of the hospital, discovered the truth. Instead of exposure, he chose blackmail, an annuity, silence, control. The doctor paid until the sum became ruinous. Poirot set the photograph down and lifted the burnt fragment of vellum. Last week, Sir Edmund drafted a new will, disinheriting Victor, leaving the collection to the nation. Victor discovered it, enlisted Elena to forge an earlier draft. They burned the new one in the library grate. Ashes I recovered. A crime, but not murder. He turned to Lydia Gray's Ouija board. The medium was engaged to hold a séance, ostensibly for amusement. In truth, Grimes persuaded her to spell accusations, Victor, to deflect suspicion. The silver thread from her shawl was planted on the sanctuary carpet by Grimes himself when he passed her in the corridor at 11:30. She believed it a harmless prank. Mrs. Finch's duplicate key came next. Sir Edmund trusted his housekeeper with emergencies. Grimes borrowed the key, took a wax impression in the still room, the yellow flakes. He returned it before she noticed. The Yale copy in her ring opened the lock halfway, enough to practice the forceps maneuver. Victor flushed. And my IOU? Real, Poirot said gently. £10,000 lost at cards. Sir Edmund refused to pay. You plan to steal the reliquary, sell it in Paris, the candlestick in your room. Stage blood, port wine dented by your own fist in rehearsal. You staged the attack in the dark to appear a victim. Elena's ledger followed. You altered values to inflate the estate, hoping to secure Victor's inheritance. Innocent of murder, guilty of love. Lady Beatrice's diamond brooch, missing stone, was laid beside the thimble. The stone financed your Paris dreams. You knew nothing of the murder, but everything of the will. Poirot lifted the vacuum flask. The weapon's cradle, distilled water frozen in the syringe barrel. The steel needle warmed, the ice core remained. Thrust, withdrawal, melt. The puddle evaporated by morning. Pure water, no residue. The forceps gleamed. The key's salvation. Inserted through the keyhole, jaws gripping the bow, see the crescent scratch. A quarter turn. The door locked from outside, key left inside. The bolt was Sir Edmund's own, thrown before death. Chapter 10. Epilogue and Departure. The 3:15 from Morton and Marsh pulled away from the platform with a sigh of steam and a gentle lurch, as though the train itself were reluctant to leave the Cotswolds behind. Hercule Poirot sat in the first-class compartment, traveling rug across his knees, a small leather valise on the rack above containing nothing more dramatic than a change of linen and a tin of mustache wax. Captain Hastings occupied the opposite seat, gazing out at the receding landscape with the expression of a man who has just watched a particularly satisfying play and is trying to decide which scene to applaud first. The fields were silvered with late frost. The hedgerows dripped like chandeliers after a ball. Poirot adjusted the window a fraction, allowing in a breath of cold, clean air. "You are pensive, Hastings. The case is closed, the villain in custody, the silver en route to the British Museum. What troubles the soul?" Hastings turned, cheeks flushed from the draught. "Only wondering how you knew, Poirot. The ice needle, brilliant, of course, but the distilled water, the forceps? You suspected Grimes from the start." Poirot's smile was small and cat-like. "Not from the start, mon ami, from the puddle. House water leaves a tide mark. Lime, minerals, the signature of the pipes. This was pure like a physician's serum. Then the vacuum flask in the wastebasket. Only a doctor keeps such things. The rest unfolded like a paper flower in water." The train gathered speed, click-clacking over points. A porter passed in the corridor, pushing a trolley that smelled of tea and buttered toast. Hastings signaled for 2 cups. "And the red herrings? Victor's IOU, Lydia's Ouija, Elena's forgeries, all so convincing." "Convincing because they were real," Poirot said, accepting his cup with a nod. "Grimes scattered truths like chaff. The IOU was genuine debt. The Ouija spelled Victor because Lydia feared him. The forgeries were acts of love. He needed only to nudge each suspect into greater suspicion. The storm did the rest. Darkness, confusion, panic. Steam drifted past the window, briefly obscuring the view. When it cleared, the Cotswolds had given way to the softer hills of Oxfordshire. Hastings stirred his tea thoughtfully. Grimes was clever. The ice, self-destroying, silent. The forceps through the keyhole. I'd never have thought of it. "Clever, yes," Poirot agreed, "but not wise. Cleverness builds the trap. Wisdom knows when to stop digging. He planted too many clues, each suspect too perfectly guilty. That is the murderer's vanity, to be the puppet master. But the little gray cells, they see the strings." The train slowed for a signal. In the quiet, the tick of Poirot's pocket watch was audible, steady as a heartbeat. Hastings set his cup in the saucer. "And Blackwood Hall? What becomes of it?" Poirot sipped, considering. "Lady Beatrice departs for Paris next week. Trunks already labeled. Victor and Elena will marry in the village church come spring. The estate passes to the museum trust, but they keep the dower house. Mrs. Finch remains as custodian. The sanctuary becomes a library, the silver cases replaced by shelves of books. Lydia Gray has taken a post in Torquay reading palms for tourists. The house breathes again. A whistle sounded, the train lurched forward. Hastings leaned back, eyes half closed. "Funny to think of all that silver locked away in London vaults. Sir Edmund would hate it." Non, Poirot corrected gently. He hoarded to possess. The museum shares. His name will be on every label, every catalogue. A different immortality. They passed through a tunnel. Darkness swallowed the compartment, then released it into sunlight again. Poirot produced a letter from his waistcoat, heavy cream stock, the blackwood crest. From the curator. The sapphire goblet is the centerpiece of the new medieval gallery. They have named the wing after Sir Edmund. Justice, you see, has many facets. The train began its descent toward London, the skyline pricking the horizon like a promise. Hastings watched it approach. Back to Whitehaven Mansions, then. Lemon tisane, silence, and the evening paper. Poirot folded the letter with precision. And tomorrow, perhaps a new case. The little gray cells, they grow restless. Paddington Station welcomed them with its familiar chaos. Porters shouting, pigeons wheeling beneath the iron ribs of the roof, the smell of coal and hot oil. Briggs was waiting with the rolls, cap touched in greeting. The drive through Hyde Park was golden with autumn. Leaves drifted across the windscreen like confetti. At Whitehaven Mansions, the lift attendant greeted Poirot with a cheerful, "Evening, sir." The flat was exactly as they had left it. Fires laid, correspondence stacked, the faint scent of verbena from the bowl on the hall table. Poirot hung his hat, arranged his gloves, and poured 2 small glasses of sirop de cassis. Hastings raised his in a toast. To the silver sanctuary. May its secrets stay buried. Poirot clinked glasses. To order restored, and to the truth which, like good silver, shines brightest when polished. Outside, London settled into evening. The Thames caught the last light and threw it back in shards of rose and gold. Somewhere in a police van, Dr. Grimes stared at the passing streets and saw nothing. In a museum vault, the sapphire goblet gleamed under gentle spotlights, waiting for tomorrow's visitors. And in a quiet flat above the city, Hercule Poirot allowed himself one small, satisfied sigh.